She is already on her knees by the time the light leaves her hands. The mud is cold. She knew it would be cold. She pressed her palms into the earth because the earth is the only thing that holds still when her body stops cooperating. And right now, her body has decided it is done standing, done transmuting, done carrying the weight of someone else's agony through her nervous system and turning it into something useful. Inside the cottage behind her, an old farmer is sitting up in bed for the first time in 4 months. He is calling for his wife. His voice is strong and clear and alive. Outside, Elara cannot feel her fingers. She thinks this is fine. She always thinks this is fine. The light fades from her palms, that cold silver blue shimmer that no one is supposed to see, and the compounds form in the creases of her skin like tiny luminous tears, and then everything goes quietly dark. The mud receives her without ceremony, and far away, in a palace she was barred from entering 3 years ago. Something is beginning that will find her here in the mud, in the silence, in the life she built from what was left after they decided she was worth nothing. It will find her. She just does not know it yet. Which country are you listening from right now? Please drop it in the comments below. I would love to know how far this story reaches. The farmer's son carried her home again. His name was Bram. He was 19 years old, broad-shouldered, and deeply uncomfortable with the task he had been performing every few weeks for the past 2 years. He did not know what to say when he carried her. He did not know what to say when she woke either. So he said nothing, which suited Elara perfectly, because she had nothing left to spend on conversation after a session. She woke to her own ceiling, low, timber-beamed, the familiar water stain above the left corner that she had always thought looked like a running wolf if you tilted your head a certain way. She was wrapped in her wool blanket. There was a pot of something warm on the small iron stove. Bram was already gone. This was how it worked in Thornhaven. They received her help. They brought what they could in return: bread, firewood, eggs, the occasional jar of preserved plums from Widow Calla's orchard. They did not ask questions. They told themselves she had a weak constitution. They told themselves she simply overworked. They told themselves these things because the alternative required a kind of looking that most people preferred not to do. Elara did not blame them for this. She had spent a long time trying to, and found she could not sustain it. She sat up slowly, pressing one hand to her sternum, where the last traces of absorbed bone fever still prickled like cooling embers. The old farmer's pain had been deep and long-standing, the kind that had settled into the architecture of a body over years, woven into the calcium and cartilage until it became structural. Drawing it out had taken 90 minutes and left her with what felt like the ghost of every step he had been unable to take for 4 months, stacked inside her ribcage and slowly dissolving. By morning, she would be fully herself again. By morning, she would be ready to go back. She rose and went to the wall. The cottage's interior was entirely occupied by her work. The walls were lined with shelves, and the shelves were lined with jars, hundreds of them, each sealed with dark wax, each labeled in her precise small handwriting. Name of patient, date of session, nature of absorbed suffering, properties of resultant compound, recommended application and dosage. The labels were meticulous because Elara's mind worked meticulously, because the gift required exactness, because a compound produced from bone pain behaved entirely differently from a compound produced from nerve damage or organ disease or the specific grinding exhaustion of chronic sleeplessness. She had been producing these compounds for 6 years. She had been in Thornhaven for 3. She moved through her morning routine with the practiced efficiency of someone who has stripped every unnecessary thing from their days. She ate, she dressed, she checked the previous day's compounds against her notes. She stepped outside into the pale morning light of the village and began her rounds. Thornhaven was a small settlement, 43 permanent residents, plus the transient families who camped at the eastern edge during harvest season. Elara knew every face and every body. She knew who carried inherited joint trouble and who had been coughing through the damp months. She knew which children were growing true and which were growing sideways. She knew these things the way she knew everything about the living, through proximity, through the specific and involuntary resonance that began every time she came within arm's reach of someone in pain. The pull, she had never found a better word for it. It was not dramatic. It was not a voice or a vision. It was the feeling of a tuning fork being struck somewhere inside her chest, a low vibration, specific and directional, pointing her toward the source of the suffering the way water found its level. She could choose to ignore it. Technically, the way a person with perfect pitch could theoretically tolerate a room full of instruments playing in different keys. She had tried it once when she was 17, on a morning when she was particularly tired and particularly determined to have one day that was only hers. She had made it 3 hours before the pull from a neighbor's kitchen, a baby with an undiagnosed ear infection, in agony and unable to explain why, became something indistinguishable from a physical rope being pulled through her chest. She had run the 3 blocks between them. She had not tried to ignore it again. Her morning rounds took 2 hours. She rebooked a follow-up treatment for a young shepherd recovering from a broken arm. She left a compound on the doorstep of the miller's wife, who was too proud to ask for help and always found the jars without acknowledging where they came from. She sat for 15 minutes with widow Kala, who was 91 and not in particular pain but who was lonely, which registered as its own low frequency in Elara's chest, not the acute pull of physical suffering, but the dull, persistent ache of a human being who had stopped being seen. She did not have a compound for loneliness. She had tried once to determine whether she could absorb and transmute it. It had not worked. Some things, she had concluded, could not be solved by one person absorbing them into herself. Some things required different medicine entirely. On her way back to the cottage, she passed the village well where Pip was waiting for her. Pip was 12, gap-toothed, and entirely dedicated to assisting Elara with the administrative portions of her work. He could not read her labels yet, but he had memorized which jars went on which shelf by color and size, and he was working on the letters with considerable determination. He was holding a jar she did not recognize. She stopped. She looked at it. "Found it on the stool," Pip said, with the particular gravity of a 12-year-old delivering important news. "Think you made it when you were very tired a few days back. Don't remember making it?" She took the jar from him and turned it in her hands, her own handwriting on the label, but she had no memory of producing this compound. None. 3 days ago, she had treated a child with a respiratory infection and had gone to bed early. She had not had another session. She had not absorbed anything. She looked at the compound inside the jar. It was a color she had never produced before. She put it in her pocket and said nothing, and walked the rest of the way home with the particular expression of a woman who has just noticed a crack in the foundation of something she built very carefully. The cart arrived at midday. Elara heard it before she saw it. The particular uneven rhythm of wheels on the unpaved track that led from the eastern settlements into Thornhaven, a sound that carried urgency in its irregularity. She set down the compound she was labeling and went to the door. The woman driving the cart was perhaps 40, dark-haired, her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has been terrified for so long that the terror has become indistinguishable from her resting state. Beside her on the cart bench, wrapped in a traveling blanket despite the mild afternoon, was a boy of perhaps 16. He was awake, which was something. He was not entirely present, which was something else. His name, the woman told Elara in a rapid, desperate stream of words, was Kale. He had been wounded 3 weeks ago by a blade carried by a raider from the northern pass. Not an ordinary blade, the woman said, pressing the word "not ordinary" with the emphasis of someone who had been told this many times by many people who then told her there was nothing to be done. The wound itself had closed. It had closed within days, which the physicians at Carthan had declared a good sign. But Kale had not improved. He had not declined exactly, but he had not improved. He lay still and quiet, and ate very little and looked at things that were not there, with a focused, courteous attention that frightened his mother more than screaming would have. Elara knelt beside the cart and looked at the boy. She did not touch him yet. She looked at him first because the gift deserved that courtesy, because she had learned early on that rushing the approach changed the quality of the absorption, made it rougher, less precise. She looked at Kale and she felt the tuning fork strike in her chest, and this time the resonance was not the low, familiar frequency of physical damage, but something layered and complex, a chord, she thought, not a single note. Multiple sources of suffering wound around each other like threads on a spindle. She said to the mother quietly, "This will cost me. I will need to rest after. You may need to wait a few hours before I can speak with you about what I found." The woman said she understood. She did not understand, but her consent was genuine, and that was what mattered. Elara sat on the low stool that Pip dragged to the side of the cart without being asked. He had learned by now to read the setup, and she placed both hands on Kale's chest over the place where the blade had entered. Through the fabric, she felt it immediately. The wound that had closed on the surface and continued its work beneath. The curse threaded through 3 weeks of innocent tissue like rot through timber, patient and unhurried and absolute. She breathed out slowly and opened. The pull that followed was not gentle. In the first moments of a major absorption, the sensation was always the same, a sudden lurching expansion in her chest, as though something very large was being accommodated in a space built for something much smaller. The pain came through her palms in a wave, not her pain, someone else's pain, wearing her nerve endings like a coat, and her nervous system lit up with the full inventory of what Cale had been carrying for 3 weeks. It was considerable. There was the physical wound itself, still actively unhealthy beneath the closed surface. There was the specific quality of cursed pain, which differed from natural pain the way spoiled water differed from clean, chemically similar on the surface, fundamentally contaminated at the source. And beneath both of these, there was something Elara had not expected. The boy's own desperate attempt to contain what was happening to him. The sustained muscular effort of a 16-year-old holding himself together through sheer stubborn will, and the enormous exhaustion of that effort pressing down on everything else. She took all of it. The transmutation began in her chest, a process she had never successfully explained to anyone who asked, because it did not have a vocabulary in conventional medicine. The best she had managed once, to a very patient village healer who genuinely wanted to understand, was this: imagine that pain has a structure, the way ice has a structure, and imagine that what my body does is apply exactly the right temperature to that structure to transform it into something else. Not destroy it, transform it. The suffering does not disappear. It becomes, it hurt. It always hurt, but it was her hurt, now translated, processed, hers to carry through to the other side. Cale made a soft sound and his eyes cleared. He looked at his mother. His mother covered her mouth with both hands. On Elara's palms, 3 crystalline droplets formed along the creases of her lifeline, a cold silver blue, each one catching the afternoon light with a precision that had nothing to do with ordinary chemistry. She registered them distantly, knew their properties without analysis, directed Pip with a gesture toward the collection vials. She was nearly done. And then the cursed core resisted. It was new. She had absorbed curses before, minor ones, mostly the low-grade malicious work of hedge mages and bitter rivals, and they had always transformed with the same process as everything else. Slower perhaps, more effortful, but ultimately yielding. This one did not yield. It sat in the center of her chest, cold and dense and deliberate, and pushed back with something that felt disturbingly like intention. She forced it through. She used every disciplined layer of will she had developed across 6 years of this work, and she pressed the transmutation through the resistance until the cursed structure broke apart and became grudgingly what she needed it to become. The 4th droplet formed, different from the others, darker at its core, with a faint copper edge that she had never produced before. Then she fell forward off the stool. Pip caught the vials. Bram, who had appeared from somewhere with his usual prescient timing, caught her. Cale's mother was already weeping with relief over her son, who was asking for water in a normal voice and looking at the world with his own eyes again. Elara did not see any of this. She was already somewhere else, and on her sternum, beneath her linen shirt, where no one could see it, a bruise was forming in the exact shape of a hand that did not belong to her. She slept for 14 hours. This was longer than usual. A standard absorption left her unconscious for 4 to 6 hours, after which she would surface gradually the way a swimmer surfaces, aware of increasing light and pressure before breaking the water's surface entirely. 14 hours meant the cursed resistance had cost her more than she had calculated in the moment. She filed this information away with the practical detachment she applied to everything that frightened her. When she woke, the bruise was still there. She pressed 2 fingers against it, through the fabric of her shirt, and felt the shape of it, not a bruise produced by impact, not the spreading purple-black of a struck body, but something precise and bounded, approximately the size and shape of a large hand, positioned directly over her sternum. She had had bruises after difficult sessions before. Never shaped like this, never this persistent. She lay still in the late afternoon light, her hands folded on her stomach, and let her mind move where it went when her body was too depleted to redirect it. It went, as it always did after difficult sessions, to the capital. She had been 22 years old, and she had believed with the particular confidence of a young woman who had managed to keep her gift quiet and controlled through an entire childhood that she could move through a large city undetected. She had come to the capital with a modest ambition, to find work as a conventional herbalist, to use her hands and her knowledge in a place where the patients were more varied and the resources more substantial than anything her home province could offer, to be careful, as she had always been careful about what she revealed and to whom. She had managed almost 3 months. The pull, the night, everything broke, had woken her from sleep. It was something she had always hated about the gift, its complete indifference to her own condition. It did not care that she was asleep. It did not negotiate. It simply struck, in the dark of her rented room, with the full force of something large and specific, a person in extraordinary pain, very close, the signal so strong it had come through the stone walls of 2 buildings as though they were paper. She had dressed quickly and followed it. The palace medical wing's delivery entrance had been propped open by a supply barrel that had not been fully moved. She would think about this later, about how specific and irresponsible that access had been, how differently everything might have gone if the barrel had been moved 6 inches to the left. She had gone through the door and followed the pull down a corridor she did not know, and into a small antechamber where a royal guard named Oren was dying. She knew he was dying the moment she felt him. The nature of a dying person's pain had a specific quality, a broadness, a reaching, the body's systems crying out simultaneously rather than in sequence. Oren had been struck by something that had ruptured internal tissue, and the palace physicians had done what they could and determined it was not enough. And he was lying on a cot in the antechamber with 2 other guards standing helplessly nearby, because no one wanted to be the one to leave him alone. She knelt beside him. She placed her hands on his chest. She was deep in the transmutation, perhaps 4 minutes in, the compounds beginning to form, the worst of it already absorbed and processing when the door opened and the room changed. She had felt the change before she looked up, a different frequency entirely. Power, authority, and beneath both of those, the specific cold quality of someone who had already made a judgment before they had all the information. King Darian had been 26. He was taller than she had expected, which was an irrelevant detail she had nonetheless never been able to remove from the memory. He took in the scene in approximately 2 seconds, the trespassing Omega, the hands on guard, the unidentified glowing substances on her palms, and she watched him decide what he was seeing. She had tried to speak. She had said, "I am helping him." The guard who reached her first had put a hand over her mouth, not roughly, but firmly and completely, in the manner of someone executing an instruction already given. She had been lifted to her feet. The compounds had scattered from her palms, undelivered, incomplete, and she had watched them dissolve on the stone floor with a grief disproportionate to their size. She had been taken to the public courtyard at dawn. Darian had delivered the formal expulsion order himself as protocol required, reading it from the official document in his clear, carrying voice. She had listened to every word, standing in the early morning cold between 2 guards, and she had watched his face throughout. He had looked at the document. He had looked at the guards. He had looked at a point approximately 4 inches above her head. He had never looked at her face. He had been turning away before the final word was finished, a king with other things to do. Oren had recovered completely the next morning. She had heard this from a market seller near the city gate, as she was being escorted out of the capital. She had stopped walking for a moment when she heard it, and the guards had pushed her gently forward, and she had continued. 3 years she had built her life in Thornhaven out of the pieces of that morning, and she had mostly succeeded in not letting the pieces cut her anymore. Mostly. The cottage door opened. Pip stepped in and his face was wrong, too careful, too wide-eyed, carrying the deliberate blankness of a 12-year-old who had been told to deliver something and was uncertain of the consequences. He was holding her journal, her private journal, the one that never left the locked chest beneath her work table. She sat up. He said quietly, "A man brought it, city clothes," said the royal apothecary sent him. He held out the satchel. Inside the journal, tucked between the cover and the first page, was a note on official paper, sealed with a mark she recognized as the royal medical seal. She read it. Lord Aldrin, chief physician to the crown, was dying of an untreatable illness. Every royal herbalist had declared the required compound impossible to produce. The apothecary had found her compounds in 3 outer villages and traced their properties to her journal. They needed her. They needed her to come to the palace. Elara sat for a long time with the journal in her hands and the bruise on her chest pulsing steadily, like a second heartbeat with a warning in it. Then she reached for her pen and began a list of what she would need to pack. Darian had not intended to come himself. He had intended to send the royal apothecary or one of the senior medical advisors, or at minimum a well-credentialed envoy with the authority to negotiate terms and convey urgency without requiring the personal presence of a king. He had fully intended this, and had spent an evening making the arrangement, and had then spent the following morning systematically dismantling it, and had ridden out of the capital before dawn on the third day, with 2 guards dressed as traveling merchants and a name that was not his own. He told himself it was because Lord Aldrin's condition had deteriorated overnight, and the matter was too urgent for intermediaries. This was partially true. The other part, which he did not examine, was that the apothecary's report had included a detail that lodged under his skin like a splinter and resisted extraction. The handwriting in the outer village journals matched the handwriting in the expulsion record from 3 years ago, filed in the palace's administrative archive under the category of trespass and fraud. He rode to Thornhaven as Caden, aide to the royal physician, and arrived to find that Elara had not responded to the summons. He stood in the village square with this information and recalibrated his expectations. A woman who did not come when the palace called was either too frightened, too principled, or too entirely disinterested in royal authority to be managed through conventional channels. He was not sure which of these he was dealing with. He was not sure which one he preferred. He found her outside her cottage, treating a line of 7 people with the calm efficiency of someone who had been doing this specific thing for a very long time and had ceased to require any particular acknowledgement for it. She moved from person to person without pause and without theater, no performance of gift, no visible expectation of gratitude. She checked a child's fever with the back of her hand, adjusted an elderly man's arm brace, listened with full attention to a woman describing symptoms that were too vague to diagnose from description alone. She said to the woman, "Come back in 3 days. I want to observe the pattern before I decide on a compound." The woman left satisfied. Darian had spent 20 years reading people. It was one of the primary practical skills of kingship, the rapid assessment of motivation, the identification of the thing beneath the performed thing. He applied this skill to Elara for 15 minutes from across the square and found, with a discomfort he was not accustomed to, that he could not place her. There was no performance to read beneath. She was exactly what she appeared to be. He introduced himself as Caden when the line had cleared. She looked at him with eyes that were direct without being aggressive, measuring without the obsequious edge that most people applied to strangers who arrived well-dressed with official business. She said, "I know why you're here." And then she gave him a task without waiting for him to establish authority or context, which was, he realized, an extremely effective way of preventing him from doing either. She asked him to catalog the supply shelf along the cottage's eastern wall, while she finished her afternoon notes. He cataloged the shelf. He was methodical about it. He had not cataloged anything personally since his administrative apprenticeship at 17. And he found that the repetitive physical task of lifting and noting and replacing each jar created an unusual quality of attention. He read every label. He read the names and dates and absorbed conditions and resultant compounds. He did the arithmetic of the dates. He understood by the time he reached the 3rd shelf that he was looking at 6 years of sustained, solitary, undocumented medical work of extraordinary precision. He was still processing this when the merchant's cart overturned on the village road. He was at the cottage door before he registered moving. Elara was already past him, already running not with the lurching urgency of panic, but with the focused directional speed of the pull. He understood now, reading it in her body as she moved toward the sound. He followed and stood back and watched her work. He had read the apothecary's report. He had understood it intellectually as a document. He had not understood it as a thing that happened in a human body in the middle of a road, with mud on both knees and the light coming off her palms like winter moonrise, and her face carrying that particular expression that he would spend a long time trying to name afterward, anguish and peace occupying the same features simultaneously. The way a major chord carried both tension and resolution in a single sound. She fell forward in the road and did not move. He was already kneeling beside her when he reached into his coat pocket for the apothecary's reference document and stopped. The jar in his pocket, the handwriting on its label, the handwriting on the expulsion record, the woman unconscious in the mud in front of him. He did not move for a long time. No one else was available. Bram was at the eastern fields and would not return until evening. Pip had run to fetch water. The remaining villagers were occupied with the overturned cart's driver, who had a dislocated shoulder and was expressing his discomfort loudly and at length. Darian looked around the road with the assessment speed of a man trained to identify available resources in a crisis, found none, and lifted Elara himself. She was lighter than she should have been. He registered this before he registered anything else about carrying her, not her features, not her stillness, not the cold of her hands where they fell against his arm. Her weight was the first thing, because it spoke before anything else did, and what it said was, "This is a body that has been spending itself for a very long time, and no one has been counting the cost." He carried her to the cottage and pushed the door open with his shoulder and stood for a moment in the interior, recalibrating. He had read the labels on the shelves. He had understood them as data. He had not understood them as a room that was entirely, exhaustively, without remainder, dedicated to the act of converting one person's suffering into another person's survival. Every inch of the wall, every shelf. Hundreds of patients, hundreds of sessions, hundreds of collapses in mud and road, and probably worse, stretching back 6 years in her small, careful handwriting. He set her on the bed with more care than he had applied to most things in recent memory. He found the blanket, he found the stove and the pot of water Pip had apparently left prepared, and he heeded it because it seemed like the correct thing to do, and because standing still in this cottage felt like a passive participation in something he was not yet able to name. He sat on the floor with his back to the wall across from her bed, because sitting on her only chair felt presumptuous in a way he could not articulate, and he waited. She woke 40 minutes later. Her first movement was to press one hand to her sternum, eyes still closed, a private checking gesture, a woman taking inventory of her own damage. Then she opened her eyes and found him on the floor and went very still in a way that was not surprise but was something more controlled than surprise. The reaction of someone who has trained themselves out of visible startled responses. She said, "You should not be in here." He said, "You were alone. There was no one else available to bring you." She considered this. She did not ask him to leave, which he took as provisional permission to remain. She sat up carefully, and he watched her take stock of herself the way a general took stock of a field, after engagement, practical, unsentimental, assessing what remained and what had been spent. She said, "The merchant. How is he?" He said, "Walking, complaining. His shoulder will need resetting by someone with more conventional skills than I have. But he is well." She nodded and said nothing further about it. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and reached for the water he had left on the stool nearby, and he watched her drink it and thought about the jars, and thought about 6 years, and thought about the guard named Oren whose file he had not yet pulled, but whose recovery he was becoming increasingly certain he already understood. He said, because he needed to say something, and this was the safest available version, "Lord Aldrin's illness has progressed significantly in the past week. The apothecary believes he may not survive another month without the compound your methods can produce. I was told you received the summons." She said, "I received it." She said nothing more. He said, "Will you come?" She looked at him for a moment with those direct measuring eyes. She said, "Why did you come personally, Caden? The apothecary could have delivered this message." He said, "I needed to understand what I was asking." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And do you understand what you're asking?" He looked at the walls, at the 6 years of careful handwriting, at the evidence of a life spent in service to people who did not understand what they were receiving. He said, "I'm beginning to." She said she would think about it and asked him to leave so she could dress. He stood and moved to the door and turned at the threshold because something made him turn, some instinct he did not examine. He said, "What is your name?" She told him. He repeated it, and the guilt came through before he could stop it. Just for one syllable. Just for the space of a breath. She went very still. Her eyes found his with the precision of a woman who had been watching for danger for 3 years and knew exactly what it looked like. She said, "You know my name." It was not a question. It was Pip who broke it. He came through the cottage door at a run, breathing hard, with the particular expression of a 12-year-old carrying information he did not fully understand but sensed was significant. He looked at Darian standing at the threshold and said, without preamble and with complete innocence, "Your Majesty, the escort riders are asking if you will be staying in the village tonight or returning to the road camp." The room went very quiet. Darian did not deny it. He had learned, early in his reign, that a denial issued into a silence like this one only deepened the eventual damage. He stood at the threshold and said nothing, and his silence was its own confirmation, and Elara received it with the stillness of a woman who had been braced for impact for 3 years and had finally felt it arrive. She said to Pip, very calmly, "Go help Bram with the evening water, please." Pip looked between them with the rapidly developing social intelligence of a child who has spent 2 years in a healer's cottage, understood that something significant was happening, and removed himself with speed. The door closed. Elara did not move from the edge of the bed. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at Darian in the doorway, and the quality of her looking was different now, not the careful measuring of a stranger, but the focused, unflinching regard of a woman reading a situation she had prepared for, without knowing she was preparing for it. She said, "Close the door." He did. He stood inside the closed cottage and waited, because it was her cottage and her conversation, and he had forfeited every claim to directing it the moment Pip spoke. She said, 3 years ago in the capital, in the palace medical wing, you had me removed. You read the expulsion order yourself. You did not look at my face. He said, yes. She said, the guard's name was Oren. He served in your eastern garrison as of last winter. He recovered completely the morning after I was expelled. You found him in a cot in an antechamber, and you found me kneeling beside him with my hands on his chest, and you decided what you were seeing without asking me a single question. He said yes. She let the yes sit in the room for a moment. She did not add to it, and she did not soften it, and she did not release him from it. Then she said, did you ever ask him, Oren? Did you ever ask him whether someone helped him that night? The answer lived in Darian's chest like something with weight. He had pulled Oren's file last night. He had read the physician's note, spontaneous and complete recovery, cause unknown, no record of prior treatment. He had read the date. He had understood in the privacy of the road camp before dawn exactly what had happened in that antechamber, what she had been doing when he found her, what the glowing compounds had been, what his rapid authoritative judgment had interrupted and then expelled from his capital. He said, no, I did not ask him. She nodded once, a small and precise movement. She was not performing grief. She was not asking him to witness her pain. She was simply stating the record, cleanly and without embellishment, the way she labeled her jar's name, date, nature of the thing, properties of what resulted. She said, I was trying to help him. He would have died without it. I know this because I can feel the nature of what I absorb, and what Oren had that night was not survivable without intervention. She said it the way a person stated a fact that had been true for 3 years, whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Darian said, because there was only one honest thing available to him in this room. I was wrong. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, I know. She stood and went to the window and stood with her back to him, looking out at the Thornhaven evening. He waited. He had learned something in 40 minutes on a cottage floor that he had not learned in 20 years of kingship, that waiting when the other person needed it was not weakness. She said finally, I will come to the capital. I will treat Lord Aldrin. He is innocent of everything between you and me, and whatever his condition is, I will do what I can for it. She said, I have one condition. You will not speak of my gift to anyone until I give you permission. Not the apothecary, not your council, not your guards. He said, agreed. She began to move around the cottage, quietly and efficiently gathering what she needed. He watched her pack a small bag with the systematic focus of a woman who had learned to travel light because she had never had the luxury of traveling heavy. Her hand passed over her sternum as she reached for something from the high shelf, a brief, involuntary gesture. A woman checking a wound she had not shown anyone. She did not acknowledge it. She continued packing. He said nothing, but he noted it with the attention of a man who was, for the first time in a long time, trying very hard to see what was actually in front of him. The capital was larger than she remembered, and colder and more indifferent. She had prepared herself for the emotional weight of returning. She had spent 2 days on the road constructing careful internal architecture around the experience, the way she constructed careful internal architecture around everything that threatened to cost her more than she could afford. She had told herself it was simply a city, stone and commerce and population density. It had no memory of her, it owed her nothing, and she owed it nothing, and the sooner she completed what she had come to do, the sooner she could return to Thornhaven and the life she had built there. None of this preparation survived the city gate. It was the smell first, the specific compound of wood smoke and river water, and the particular mineral cold of stone streets in early autumn that her body recognized before her mind gave it permission to. Then the sounds, the market vendors, the cartwheels on cobblestone, the layered noise of thousands of people living in close proximity. She had spent 3 years in a village of 43. The capital received her like a physical force. She rode beside Darian through the main avenue and did not look at him and kept her expression composed and her back straight, because she had decided before they entered the gate that she would not give this city or this palace the satisfaction of seeing her diminished by it. She had made herself in Thornhaven. Whatever this place had thought she was, it had been wrong, and she was the proof of that, and she would carry herself accordingly. The court noticed her. She felt the whispers before she heard them, not through her gift, which required touch, but through the ordinary human awareness of being watched. As Darian led her through the palace corridors, the people they passed performed their deference to the king while their attention moved sideways to the unknown Omega walking beside him. She was not dressed as a palace guest. She was dressed as what she was. A working healer in clean, practical clothing, carrying a satchel of compounds and a journal, and the particular self-possession of someone who had stopped requiring external validation to know their own worth. Darian walked ahead of her and behind her by turns, which she observed with the detachment of someone noting an interesting behavioral pattern. He was not sure, she thought, what position to occupy. He had not been sure of his position relative to her since the cottage, and she found this neither satisfying nor distressing, simply accurate. He should not be sure. He had not earned sureness yet. Lord Aldrin's chambers were in the palace's eastern wing, south-facing for the light, which told her immediately that someone who loved him had chosen the room. The space had the quality of a place shaped by care, small accumulated evidences of people who had brought things and arranged things and spent time there out of genuine feeling rather than obligation. Lord Aldrin himself was propped on pillows in the window's light, and when she stepped into the room, he turned toward her with eyes that were still sharp despite the gray exhaustion of his face. He was perhaps 70, broad-shouldered in the way of men who had once been very strong and retained the architecture of it, even as the substance diminished. He looked at her and did not perform a patient's performance of hope or desperation. He simply reached for her hand. She gave it to him. He said, "I am told you are the best chance I have. I want you to know I am grateful you came, and that whatever you decide you can or cannot do for me, I consider your presence here a gift I have not earned." She said, "I'm told you were kind to a young woman who was in some trouble 3 years ago." He said with the faint smile of a man who remembered many kindnesses and did not keep a careful accounting of them, "I try to be kind when I can. It is not always the easiest habit to maintain in a palace." She said it was sufficient. From the doorway, Darian watched this exchange with the expression of a man who was receiving information on multiple frequencies simultaneously and processing none of it quickly enough. Elara sat on the edge of Lord Aldrin's bed and placed both hands gently on his chest. Assessment only a light touch, a brief opening just enough to read the surface of what she was dealing with before committing to anything deeper. She read it in seconds. She removed her hands. She stood. Her face had changed the inward focusing expression that Darian had already learned to dread, but beneath it something sharper. Recognition, not the recognition of a familiar illness, but the recognition of a familiar architecture of suffering. A specific, deliberate, manufactured pattern that she had felt before, in the hands of a cursed blade, driven into a teenage boy by a northern raider. She looked at Darian in the doorway. Her voice was very even. She said, "This illness is not natural. It has been placed. Someone caused this deliberately." She paused, and then she said, "I have treated this specific pattern of suffering once before. The last person who was made to suffer this way, the person who did it wanted the first person to die slowly enough that no one would look for a cause." Darian sent for Oren's file before he reached his private study. He gave the instruction to his head of records with the particular controlled neutrality of a king who has learned that the speed and tone of a request signals its importance, and who did not want anyone in the palace measuring the importance of this one before he had measured it himself. The file arrived within 20 minutes. He set it on his desk and did not open it immediately. He stood at the window and looked at the capital's evening lights for a long time first. He was a man who had built his reign on the discipline of clear thinking, the deliberate setting aside of emotion until the practical matter was resolved, at which point the emotion could be examined in controlled conditions and filed appropriately. This discipline had served him well for 20 years. It was not serving him tonight. He opened the file. The physician's note was 3 lines, dated 3 years ago, written in the clipped administrative shorthand of a palace medical record. Spontaneous and complete recovery. Cause unknown. No record of prior treatment administered by palace staff. No record of prior treatment administered by palace staff. He read this line 4 times. He thought about the compounds dissolving on the stone floor of the antechamber. He thought about her hands, which he had seen produce those compounds in a village road with his own eyes, and which had been interrupted in that antechamber before the delivery was complete, interrupted by him. by his 2-second assessment and his absolute authority and his complete and total absence of curiosity about the explanation. He sat down. He had made decisions his entire reign based on the principle that rank and status were reliable indicators of intent, that a low-ranking Omega in a restricted palace space late at night had a limited range of likely motivations, and that the most probable of them did not include legitimate medical intervention. He had operated from this principle with the confidence of a man who had never been seriously wrong about it. He had been wrong about it. He got up again because sitting felt insufficient to the weight of what he was holding. He paced the study from window to desk to door and back again, and thought about Thornhaven, the walls of the cottage, the hundreds of jars, the 6 years of careful handwriting. He thought about Cale's mother clutching her recovered son. He thought about the merchant in the road walking away. He thought about the way Elara moved through his palace today, absorbing its hostility and indifference with the practiced ease of a woman who had long since stopped expecting anything different and had decided not to let it matter. She had built that capacity. She had been forced to build it. She had been forced to build it, at least in part, by a dawn expulsion ordered by him. He went to the medical chamber. The corridor outside, it was dim and quiet. His 2 attending guards looked at him with the carefully neutral expressions of men who had stopped being surprised by the king's movements 3 years into the reign. He pushed the door open without knocking. The chamber was lit by 2 oil lamps, warm and low. Lord Aldrin was in his bed against the far wall, and his color was... Darian stopped. His color was better in the hours since Elara had assessed him, already better. Already. From whatever partial intervention the assessment itself had permitted. The gray exhaustion of his mentor's face had shifted towards something less terminal. Elara was on the floor. She was on her back on the stone floor beside Lord Aldrin's bed, unconscious, her hands open at her sides. The faint traces of the first compound visible in the creases of her palms like cooling light. Someone had placed a folded blanket beneath her head. He thought it had probably been Lord Aldrin, working from his bed with whatever strength he had, because there had been no one else in the room. She had been alone when she fell. She was always alone when she fell. He crossed the room and sat on the floor beside her, with his back to the bed frame, and looked at her still face in the lamplight, and felt the full weight of what that sentence meant. Not as metaphor, literally. Session after session, year after year, she absorbed other people's suffering and transmuted it in her own body and fell unconscious in whatever room or road or field she happened to be in, and no one stayed. He said quietly to his guards in the doorway, "Leave us?" They left the door closed. He stayed. She woke to lamplight and the sound of someone breathing. This was not normal. In 6 years of waking after sessions, the sounds she woke to were silence or wind or occasionally Pip's anxious fidgeting outside a closed door, never breathing. Never another person in the room, sitting with the quiet patience of someone who had decided to be there and had not reconsidered. She did not move immediately. She lay still on the stone floor and looked at the ceiling and took inventory of herself, her body's condition, the residue of what she had absorbed, the status of the transmutation, and then she turned her head and found Darian sitting with his back to Lord Aldrin's bed frame, his knees drawn up loosely, watching her with an expression that was difficult to categorize. Not pity, not the particular uncomfortable guilt of someone performing an obligation, something quieter and more personal than either. She said, "You should not still be here." He said, "You were alone. You should not have been alone." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I am always alone when I fall. This is not a new condition." He said nothing to this. She had delivered it without accusation, simply as a statement of fact, the way she stated everything, but it landed in the room with the weight of 6 years behind it, and she watched him receive that weight without deflecting it or defending against it. And this surprised her enough that she filed it carefully for later examination. She sat up slowly. Her sternum ached with the deep bone soreness of a partially completed absorption, the manufactured illness in Lord Aldrin's body half processed, and the remainder scheduled for a full session when she had recovered sufficient capacity. She pressed her hand briefly to the bruise still there, still strange, and felt Darian's attention move to the gesture without comment. She reached for the water on the stool, drank, looked at Lord Aldrin, who was sleeping with a steadiness she recognized as genuine rest, rather than the exhausted unconsciousness of serious illness. She said, "He is doing better." Darian said, "I can see that." She said, "The full treatment will require a major session. Not tonight. I need 2 days of recovery first. What I did tonight was assessment and partial stabilization. It will hold him for now. He nodded then, because the practical matters had been addressed and the silence that followed them was the kind that either closed or opened, depending on what was done with it. He said, "What were you like before you came to the capital?" The first time. She looked at him. The question was unexpected enough to disarm her careful architecture slightly. She said, "Why do you want to know that?" He said, "Because I have spent 2 days understanding what you became after. I find I want to understand the before." She was quiet for a moment, deciding. Then she said, "I was less careful. I had not yet learned how much caution the gift required. I thought I could move through the world and help people and remain invisible, which is a thing that is much easier to believe before you have been made an example of in a public courtyard at dawn." He absorbed this without flinching, he said. "And Thornhaven?" She said Thornhaven was what was left. "I stopped in it because the pull stopped me there, a child with a fever, on the road on the first day. I stayed because the village needed what I had, and because I was tired of moving away from things." She paused. "I'm not certain I would choose it differently. It became a good life. It became mine." He said, "What do you want for the rest of it?" She looked at the question as though measuring its dimensions. She said, "I want a place where what I do is documented properly and protected legally. I want the healers I know exist scattered in outer villages, hiding their gifts for the same reasons I hid mine, to have somewhere to go that does not require hiding. I want the compounds I produce to be available to people who cannot afford conventional medicine." She stopped. "I want not to fall alone anymore," she said, and then looked briefly surprised at herself for saying it, as though the words had moved faster than her discretion. The door opened. The royal apothecary entered with the expression of a man carrying news that has altered his understanding of several things simultaneously. His hands were not quite steady. He held a vial of the compound from Lord Aldrin's partial treatment and said, "Without preamble, there is a molecular marker in this compound that I have seen in one other context." He paused. "It is present in a restricted class of poisons used exclusively by the palace's internal intelligence corps." The room went very still. Elara said quietly, "Whoever administered it would need regular access to his food, someone he trusts completely." The Royal Medical Guild convened its emergency session the following morning. Elara was not invited. She heard about it from the young female palace healer who brought her breakfast, a woman named Senna, perhaps 25, with careful eyes and the particular habit of checking doorways before speaking that Elara recognized as a behavior learned from prolonged exposure to environments where being overheard had consequences. Senna set the breakfast tray down and said, quietly and quickly, "Lord Physician Vance has called an emergency session of the Guild Council. The agenda item is listed as unauthorized medical practice and royal security concerns." She paused. "You should know that Vance has been monitoring Outer Village healer reports for years. Any report that mentioned unusual compounds or unregistered practitioners was intercepted before it reached the general registry. Every one of them." Elara looked at her. She said, "How do you know this?" Senna said, "Because I used to file those reports before I understood where they went." She said it with the specific flatness of someone who had long since processed her guilt about this and arrived at something more useful on the other side of it. The guild session produced its formal motion by midday. Lord Physician Vance presented it to the full palace council in the afternoon with the polished precision of a man who had rehearsed every word and anticipated every counter-argument. Elara stood at the back of the council chamber beside Darian, who had insisted she be present, and listened to a sophisticated and carefully structured dismantling of everything she was. Vance was perhaps 60, silver-haired with the particular handsomeness of a man who had spent decades being deferred to and had absorbed it into his posture. He spoke with the measured authority of the genuinely expert, which made his argument more dangerous than a less skilled one would have been. He presented testimony from 3 senior guild physicians, declaring pain alchemy a physical impossibility, and produced theoretical analyses of her compounds, suggesting they were manufactured conventional medicines relabeled with mystical terminology. He called her methods unverified and potentially dangerous to a critically ill patient. He used the language of safety and protocol with the fluency of someone who had spent years learning exactly how to make the protection of institutional power sound like the protection of vulnerable people. He called her a charlatan. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Darian listened to the full presentation without interrupting, which Elara recognized as political discipline. A king who interrupted too early gave the argument more weight by appearing threatened by it. When Vance finished, Darian said he would consider the motion and adjourn the session. Afterward, in the corridor, he said to her, "He is afraid of you. The argument is sophisticated, but fear is what is driving it." She said, "Yes," she said. "The question is what he is afraid of losing." The answer to this arrived that evening through Senna, who knocked on Elara's guest chamber door after dark with a folded paper pressed between both palms like something that had cost her something to carry. She handed it to Elara and said, "I should have given this to someone years ago. I'm sorry it took me this long." The paper was a list. It was handwritten in 3 different hands across what appeared to be several years of editions, and it contained 22 names. Beside each name, a location, a gift description, a date, and a final notation. The final notations were not medical records. They were the kind of documentation produced when a person could no longer be documented in any other way. Relocated, uncontactable, registry entry removed, withdrew from practice unverified, last known location. The last item on the list stopped Elara's reading entirely. Marin of the Westfall Border Settlement. Gift. Pain absorption and compound production. Last known contact, Elara. Recorded personal meeting at Westfall Market. Date of disappearance, 6 months following that meeting. Elara sat down on the edge of the bed. She read the name again. Marin Quiet, broad-shouldered, who had found Elara at the Westfall Market and asked in the careful circling way of someone testing whether trust was possible, whether Elara had ever noticed that pain had a structure that could be changed. They had spoken for 2 hours in a corner of the market. The only 2 people each of them had ever met who understood what they carried. Elara had given her the name of Thornhaven. She had never arrived. 6 months after their meeting, Marin of the Westfall Border Settlement had disappeared from every record that should have contained her. Elara's hands tightened on the paper. She looked up. Darian was in the doorway. She had not heard him arrive, watching her face with the attention of a man who had learned, recently and at some cost, to look at what was actually in front of him. She held up the list without speaking. He crossed the room and took it. He read it. His face, as he read, underwent a series of changes that he did not attempt to control, which told her something about how far they had come from the man who had turned away before the final word of an expulsion order. He said very quietly, "I did not know about this." She said, "I know you did not. That is not the same as it not having happened." She could not sleep. This was not unusual. After a partial session, her body maintained a kind of alert restlessness in the hours following incomplete work, as though the gift itself remained unsatisfied, aware that the task was unfinished and unwilling to release her fully into rest. She had learned to work with this rather than against it. She rose, dressed, and went to the palace garden because the night air was cold and clear, and the cold and clarity were useful. The garden was walled on 3 sides and open to the south, looking out over the capital's lower city, which glittered in the dark with the warm, scattered light of thousands of windows. She stood at the southern edge and looked at it and thought about Marin, about a broad-shouldered woman at a market who had asked a careful question in a circling way, and about the 21 other names on the list, each one a person who had possessed something extraordinary and been made to disappear for it. She heard Darian before she saw him. His footsteps were quiet but not silent. He was not trying to approach undetected, which she had come to understand was his way of offering her the option to leave before he arrived. She did not leave. He stood beside her at the southern edge and looked at the city and said nothing for a while, which she had also come to understand was one of his better qualities, the capacity to share a silence without filling it with performance. She said, eventually, "I have been calculating the cost of the full session," he said, and she said, "It will be substantial. The manufactured component of Lord Aldrin's illness is layered differently from anything naturally occurring. It will resist the transmutation, the way the cursed blade resisted it with what feels like deliberate intention. The difference is that Aldrin's condition is more complex and more extensive, and I will not be able to force it through by will alone the way I did with Kale." She paused. "I will need to be very depleted before it completes. Days of recovery after, not hours." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will not allow it if the cost is that high." She turned and looked at him with something between exhaustion and a patience that had been built from very hard materials. She said, "You do not get to allow or disallow what I do with my own body." He said, "You're right, I know that." He said it without defense, without qualification, the way a man said something he had already decided was simply true. And then he said, "Will you let me be there when it happens? Not to interfere, just to be there." She looked at him for a moment and said she would think about it. They stood in the cold and the quiet, and the city spread below them like scattered embers. And eventually he said, "Tell me something about why you keep doing it." "The sessions, I understand the pull. I think I understand it now, at least partially. But the pull is one thing, and what you choose to do with it year after year is another." She said, "Do you ever want to stop?" He said, "I'm asking you." She said, "Every day," she said it without drama, without self-pity. "Every morning I wake depleted from the previous session and feel the next pull beginning and think, not today, not this one. Let this one find its own way through without me." She paused. "Then the pull becomes real. The person becomes real. And once they are real to me, I cannot make them unreal again just because it is inconvenient." He said, "And that has been true for 6 years." She said, "It was true before I understood what I was doing. It was true when I thought I was simply a person who felt things too strongly. The understanding came later. The truth of it was always there." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, "I have felt it too, lately, something I could not name until tonight." He looked at her and said nothing further, because the sentence had more in it than he had intended when he began it, and he was not certain the additional content had her permission yet. She understood what he meant. She was not certain she was ready to acknowledge it, but she understood it, and she allowed the understanding to exist in the space between them without resolving it. She said, "Darian." The arrow struck the garden wall 6 inches from her left temple. The sound it made entering the stone was small and precise and absolute. A single sharp report, a thin vibration through the wall's surface, and then stillness. Darian moved before she processed the sound. His arm came around her and pulled her behind the broad stone column to her right, his body positioned between her and the open southern edge, his voice low and immediate and sharp as he gave instructions to the guards who appeared at the garden entrance within seconds. She was shaking. Not with fear, she recognized this with a distant, clear surprise, but with fury. A clean, focused, white-hot anger that had nothing frightened in it. Only the absolute refusal of a woman who had survived 3 years of exile and 22 names on a list, and 1 expulsion at dawn to be removed from this fight by an arrow in a garden. She looked at Darian. His jaw was set and his expression was controlled, but beneath it she could actually feel, through the proximity and the particular heightened sensitivity that always followed a session, that he was frightened. Not for himself, for her. She said, "Let me see the arrow." He said, "Elara." She said, "Let me see it." The guard retrieved it and brought it to her. She held it in the lamplight that spilled from the garden's south wall sconces and looked at the marking on the shaft, a small symbol, precisely drawn, burned into the wood just below the fletching. She had not seen this symbol before tonight, but she had seen it 20 minutes ago on a folded paper handed to her by a woman with careful eyes. It was beside Marin's name on the list. Elara looked up. The fury was still there, steady and clarifying, and something else had joined it, a resolve that had been forming since the moment she had read Marin's name and understood what had happened to a woman who had asked a careful question at a market and made the mistake of being extraordinary. She said to Darian very quietly, "They are not warning me to leave." She said, "They are telling me they already know I'm here." They prepared the chamber the following morning. Elara's instructions were specific and architectural. The stone shutters sealed, the ventilation gaps plugged with folded cloth, the oil lamps set at their lowest useful level. She asked for a second blanket on Lord Aldrin's bed, and a folded mat on the floor beside it, and a basin of cold water on the far table. She asked for no physicians, no attendants, and no one in the corridor who would feel compelled to open the door if they heard sounds they did not understand. She asked for Darian. She had not told him she was asking for him specifically. She had told the guard to ensure the chamber was undisturbed by anyone except the king, and she had recognized in the saying of it that the distinction she was drawing was not purely practical. He arrived before she did. He was standing beside the window when she entered, and he had clearly been standing there for some time, doing the particular quality of stillness that she had come to recognize as his version of managing something he had not yet found adequate language for. He looked at her when she came in and said nothing, which was correct. Lord Aldrin was sitting up, which surprised her. He had managed it himself, had pushed himself to sitting before she arrived because she understood immediately. He did not want her first image of him to be of a man entirely surrendered to his condition. He took her hand when she sat beside him and held it for a moment. He said, "Whatever this costs you, child, I want you to know it is a gift I did not earn and cannot repay." She said, "You were kind to me the first night I arrived in this palace, when no one else was. That is enough." He smiled at this, a genuine smile. warm and unhurried, the smile of a man who had spent a long life being kind without keeping accounts and was pleased to discover that the kindness had somewhere landed. She said, "I need you to lie back now and stay as still as you can. Whatever you feel during this, do not be afraid of it. The discomfort you will feel is the illness leaving. It is a good discomfort. Trust it." He lay back. She settled beside him, placed both hands flat on his chest, and looked at Darian across the bed. She said, "Do not touch me during the session. My prior instruction stands. Your presence changes the resonance." He said, "I understand." She said, "If the light goes out of my hands before I lose consciousness, do not be alarmed. It means the transmutation has completed. If I lose consciousness before the light goes out." He said, "Then what?" She said, "Then we will deal with that when it happens." She opened. The full absorption of a manufactured illness was categorically different from anything naturally occurring. And she had known this intellectually, and the knowing did not prepare her for the reality of it. The pull that began when she opened was not the clean directional pull of organic suffering. It was a tearing, a resistance from the illness itself, as though whatever had been placed in Lord Aldrin's body had been designed with the specific intention of being difficult to remove. She took it anyway. She took it the way she had always taken everything, without flinching, without pulling back, with the absolute commitment of a woman who had decided 6 years ago that the cost of stopping was higher than the cost of continuing. The light blazed from her palms and flooded the chamber and cast Darian's shadow long against the far wall. Lord Aldrin exhaled with the sound of a man setting down a weight he had been carrying for a very long time. 40 minutes in, the manufactured core made itself known. It was cold and dense and deliberate, exactly as she had described it to Darian in the garden, and it resisted the transmutation with an intentionality that felt almost personal, as though it knew what she was and had been prepared for her specifically. She pressed against it with everything she had. The light in her palms flickered. She pressed harder. The light went out. The darkness in the chamber was not peaceful. It was the darkness of something suspended, a held breath, a stopped clock, the particular quality of stillness that preceded either resolution or collapse. Lord Aldrin's breathing had improved dramatically over the past 40 minutes, each exhale steadier and deeper than the one before, his color shifting towards something that belonged to the living rather than the almost gone. But Elara's hands on his chest were cold and still and dark, and she had not moved in 90 seconds, and Darian was counting. He stood with his hands at his sides because she had told him not to touch her, and he had agreed, and he was a man who kept his agreements. He stood and he counted, and he watched the cold stillness of her hands and told himself that 90 seconds was not a long time, and that she knew what she was doing, and that she had survived 6 years of this without him and did not need him to intervene now. 120 seconds. He thought about the apothecary's report and the jars on the cottage walls and the 14 hours she had slept after absorbing a cursed blade's residue. He thought about the bruise on her chest, still unexamined, still shaped like something that did not belong to her. He thought about her voice in the garden, "If the light goes out before I lose consciousness, do not be alarmed." She had not told him what to do if the light went out and she was still conscious, and the transmutation had stalled with the manufactured illness suspended inside her with nowhere to go. He moved. He crossed to the bed and knelt behind her on the mat and placed both hands on her shoulders, not grasping, not pulling, simply present, warm and grounded, and there, in the way that he had been there on the floor of the medical chamber when she woke and had decided in that first confused waking moment to stay and talk rather than withdraw behind the architecture of appropriate distance. He felt her flinch at the contact, a single involuntary contraction, her body registering the unexpected presence of another person. Then slowly the flinch released. Something shifted. He did not have language for what happened next because it was not a thing that happened in the body the way he understood the body. It was more fundamental than that, a resonance, an alignment, the sensation of two tuning forks brought into proximity until their frequencies matched, and the sound between them became something neither could produce alone. He felt it in his palms where they rested on her shoulders, a faint warmth that moved upward through his arms and settled in his chest with the quality of something arriving rather than departing. The light returned to her hands. Not silver blue this time. Warmer, a deep gold threaded with the original cold light, the two frequencies woven together, producing something neither of them had produced separately. It spread from her palms across Lord Aldrin's chest in a slow, steady wave, and Lord Aldrin exhaled once with a depth that seemed to reach somewhere below ordinary breathing, below the ordinary machinery of lungs and diaphragm, reaching something more fundamental. His face went completely peaceful. The transmutation completed. Elara folded forward slowly, depleted beyond the ordinary edge of depletion, and Darian's arms moved without instruction, gathering her against his chest, her back to him, his arms around her. Both of them on the floor beside the bed while Lord Aldrin slept with the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who had put down something very heavy and would not need to pick it up again. She was breathing. Her hands were warm. The compounds on her palms were extraordinary, richer and more stable than anything she had produced before, each one catching the lamplight with a density and complexity she had never achieved in solitary work. She did not lose consciousness. She rested, fully present within the circle of his arms, and did not ask him to move. After a long moment, she said quietly, "Your hands." He looked down at his own palms, still visible over her shoulders. The faint trace of gold light was there just for a breath, just for one suspended second, moving through the lines of his hands like a memory of something that had passed through him and left its mark. He stared at it in silence as it faded. Lord Physician Vance chose the full council session deliberately. Not a private motion, not a committee hearing the full council. Every senior noble and guild representative and palace official assembled in the great chamber with its high vaulted ceiling and its long table and its absolute attention to who stood where and what that position meant. He understood, as all skilled political operators understood, that the audience was the instrument. An accusation delivered before witnesses of sufficient rank became a record. A record was difficult to revise. He presented his case with the measured authority of a man who had spent 40 years building a system and knew precisely which pressure points would protect it. He called 3 guild physicians who delivered technical testimony declaring pain alchemy, a physical impossibility. He produced an analysis commissioned, he said, by the guild's independent research committee, concluding that the compounds recovered from Elara's work were sophisticated manufactured medicines, conventionally produced, relabeled with mystical terminology to create the appearance of supernatural origin. He described the king's emotional response to Lord Aldrin's illness as an understandable vulnerability, exploited by a skilled opportunist who had gained access to the palace through circumstances that merited serious investigation. He called her a charlatan. He did it beautifully. Elara stood at the back of the chamber beside Darian and listened to the entire presentation without moving. She had slept for 30 hours after the full session. She had woken with her compounds produced and her body recovered, and Lord Aldrin sitting up in bed eating broth and discussing philosophy with his attending nurse, fully and completely himself again, the manufactured illness gone from him as thoroughly as though it had never existed. She had dressed and come to the council chamber with the particular quality of stillness that she had carried since the garden. The white-hot fury cooled into something more durable, more directed, more useful than heat. When Vance finished, she walked to the front of the chamber. She did not wait to be invited. She did not look at Darian for permission. She walked to the front of the room and stood where Vance had stood, and the council looked at her, an unknown Omega in practical clothing, calm as deep water, and did not know what to do with her, which suited her perfectly. She said, "I'm going to name something about each of you that I can feel from where I stand. I'm going to ask you to consider how a person without an extraordinary gift might be expected to know these things." She named the council's eldest member, chronic compression in the 4th and 5th lumbar vertebrae, present for approximately 12 years, managed with heat and a particular brace under his left hip. The man went still and straight. She named the foreign trade representative, nerve damage in the right hand from a childhood injury, the specific tremor it produced, suppressed through decades of practiced left-hand compensation. The woman looked at her right hand. She named 4 more, each one specific, each one accurate, each one impossible to know through any conventional diagnostic means without equipment she had never been given access to. The chamber was silent in the way that large rooms go silent, when every person in them is simultaneously holding their breath. Then she looked at Lord Physician Vance. She said, "The nerve condition in your right arm has been present for 11 years. The damage originates at the 3rd cervical vertebra and produces a specific radiating pain pattern that has been affecting your surgical precision for the past 4 years. You have been self-medicating with restricted compounds from the guild's private pharmaceutical stores. The specific compound you have been using has a documented dependency profile that you have been managing by gradually increasing your dosage since the 2nd year." She paused. She said, "Shall I continue?" Vance said nothing. His face had undergone the particular transformation of a man watching his foundation crack from the inside. Darian stepped forward. He crossed the chamber floor and stood beside Elara, not in front of her, not between her and the council, but beside her, his shoulder level with hers, in the specific way that two people stand when they have decided to occupy the same position in the world and intend for that decision to be witnessed. He said, "This woman healed Lord Aldrin. I was present for every moment of his treatment. Her gift is real, her character is unimpeachable, and her expulsion from this capital 3 years ago was my error, an error I am formally correcting now on the record before this court." He said it clearly and without inflection, the way a man stated something he had already decided was simply true and was not interested in debating. The chamber was very quiet. Elara looked out at the assembled faces, the shock, the recalibration, the beginning of something she recognized as the first tentative movement of a system that has been shown it needs to change, and she felt, for the first time since she had ridden through the Capitol gate, that she was standing on ground that was actually hers. She did not wait for the momentum to slow. This was something she had learned from 6 years of working with the body's own processes, that there was a window following a major transformation when the system was most receptive to change, when the old structures had been disrupted and the new ones had not yet calcified, and that window was not patient. It did not wait for the people involved to feel comfortable. It required action while the disruption was still present and the old resistance had not yet reorganized itself into new forms. She brought her demands to Darian the following morning. He was at the council table when she arrived, which she had expected. What she had not expected was that he had cleared the table of everything except 2 cups of tea and a blank document with the royal seal already affixed at the bottom, as though he had known, with some precision, what the morning would require. She sat across from him and noted the blank document and said nothing about it, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. She said 3 things. He said, "Tell me." She said, "First, a formal registry of all Omega healers with unusual gifts, with legal protections against suppression or removal. Every entry public record, every alteration requiring royal countersignature, not guild countersignature royal." She said this specifically because the distinction mattered and she wanted it on the document. He said, "Done." She said, "Second, the dissolution of the Royal Medical Guild's monopoly on healing practice, replaced by an open council of practitioners, conventional physicians, Omega healers, and unconventional practitioners in equal representation. No single body holds exclusive authority over what constitutes legitimate medicine." He said the guild will challenge it. She said, "Let them. The challenge will require them to argue publicly that the man sitting in this room fully recovered is not fully recovered." She paused. "They will not win that argument." He said, "Done." She said, "Third, a formal inquiry into the disappearances on the list Senna gave me. Full investigative authority, access to guild records, palace intelligence archives, and the internal core's restricted files. The inquiry reports to the open council, not to any existing body with a prior interest in its conclusions." She said, "I want Marin found. I want every name on that list investigated. I want whoever was responsible to answer for it in a forum that cannot be quietly adjourned." He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. She understood, but weighing the fullness of what she was asking, which required him to open parts of the palace's institutional history that would be uncomfortable and potentially damaging. She watched him do this calculation honestly, without looking for the version of agreement that preserved the most comfort. And she felt the bruise on her chest pulse once warmly, this time, and then settle. He said, "Done, all 3. He said it with the quiet finality of a man who had made a decision and would not be revising it in subsequent conversations. He pushed the blank document across the table toward her. He said, "Write them yourself. I will sign whatever you write." She looked at the document. She looked at him. She took the pen. She wrote carefully and precisely, the way she labeled every jar, the way she dated every journal entry, with the understanding that the words on a document outlived the moment of their writing and needed to be worth outliving it. She wrote 3 provisions that were clear and specific, and built to resist the particular kinds of erosion that institutions applied to things they did not want to survive. When she finished, she set the pen down. He signed it without reading it, and she noted this was something she did not immediately name, the particular quality of trust extended by a man who had decided to stop substituting his own judgment for hers. She said, "You should always read what you sign." He said, "I read the person who wrote it." She looked at him across the table in the morning light. the signed document between them, and said, "I cannot promise you what happens after this." He said, "I know," he said. "I can wait." She said quietly, "I know." The sanctuary took 3 months to build. Not because the construction was complex. The guild annex that Vance's conviction vacated was structurally sound and generously sized, but because Elara rebuilt it from the inside out, and inside-out work required a different kind of attention than conventional renovation. She was present every day. She made decisions about ceiling height and window placement and the width of doorways with the same precision she brought to compound labeling, because she understood that a space communicated something to the people who entered it before a single word was spoken. And what she wanted this space to communicate was specific. "You're expected here. You do not need to make yourself smaller to fit." She wanted high windows. She wanted a kitchen that was also a workspace. She wanted a room at the back warm, quiet, with 2 low beds and a stove specifically for healers to rest after sessions without being alone. She had never had this room. She built it first. Darian appeared on the 3rd day carrying supply crates. He had not announced this intention. He simply arrived in the morning with his sleeves rolled and his court clothing replaced with something considerably more practical, and a carrying frame on his back that contained the first delivery of botanical supplies she had requisitioned from the royal stores. She looked at him for a moment. She said nothing. She showed him where the supplies went and returned to what she was doing. He came back the following morning with the 2nd delivery. In the morning after that, he did not insert himself into the work. He did not offer opinions on the renovation decisions or attempt to redirect the project towards something grander or more politically impressive. He carried things and built things and translated for a foreign-born healer who arrived in the 4th week, speaking 3 languages, none of which were the capital's primary tongue. With the patient attentiveness of a man who had recently developed a deep suspicion of his own assumptions about what constituted useful contribution. She watched him do this for weeks and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. The particular ease of being near a person who was not requiring anything from her. Not her gift, not her recovery rate, not her resilience, simply her presence, offered or withheld on her own terms. The sanctuary opened on a Tuesday. 17 healers arrived before midday. Most of them were Omegas. Several had gifts stranger than hers, a woman who healed by singing specific intervals, a young man whose touch produced diagnostic imagery directly in the physician's mind, an elderly wolf whose presence alone stabilized the immune response of anyone who sat near him. All of them had the particular expression of people who had spent years making themselves less visible and had not yet fully processed the possibility that visibility might now be safe. Elara moved through the opening day with quiet efficiency and a particular quality of attention she gave to the healers as they arrived, not the evaluating attention of an institution assessing new members, but the specific warm recognition of someone who understood, from the inside, what it had cost each of them to walk through that door. In the late afternoon, she found Darian sitting on the floor of the back room, with a young wolf who had arrived alone, and frightened, perhaps 20, with eyes that had been watching for exits since he walked in. Darian was sitting with his back to the wall and his legs stretched out, and he was not doing anything except being present and unthreatening and available, and the young wolf beside him had, over the course of an hour, stopped watching the exits. She went to him. She said nothing. She took his hand simply, without announcement, without the management of implications, and he looked at their joined hands with the expression of a man receiving something he had been quietly certain he did not deserve. She said, "You stayed in the room when I fell. I have been trying to tell you something since then, and I cannot find the right words. So this will have to do." He said, "It does." They stood in the open doorway of the sanctuary as the evening came in from the south, and the capital's lights rose below them, and inside the building, the sound of 17 healers talking and eating, and alive moved through the warm air like something that had been waiting a long time to exist. 3 years later, the sanctuary had 6 locations. The original Capitol building had expanded into the eastern wing it had always needed. The second location opened in Carthon, the third in the northern border settlement where Kale had grown up. He was 19 now, broad-shouldered and deliberate, studying pain alchemy under Elara's formal instruction with the focused determination of someone who understood from the inside what the gift required and had decided it was worth what it asked. The 4th and 5th locations opened within the same month, in the western provinces where the disappeared names on Senna's list had been most concentrated. The 6th opened on the Westfall border, beside the market where a broad-shouldered woman had once asked a careful question in a circling way. Marin was found in the 14th month of the inquiry. She had been relocated, not killed, which was the first thing Elara needed to know, to a remote settlement 3 provinces east, under a different name. Her records erased and her gifts suppressed through a combination of isolation and a compound the guild's pharmaceutical division had developed specifically for the purpose of disrupting unusual healer abilities. The inquiry found 11 others alive. 7 more were confirmed gone in ways that the investigators documented with the careful, unflinching specificity that justice requires. Vance and 2 senior guild officials were prosecuted. The proceedings were public and thorough and long, and Elara attended every session. Lord Aldrin, fully recovered, sharp-eyed and more energetic at 73 than he had any biological right to be served on the Open Healer Council as its founding elder member. He said at the inaugural session that in 50 years of palace medicine, he had never sat at a table where the most important person in the room was also the least likely to announce it. Everyone present understood who he meant. The formal registry documented 47 Omega healers with extraordinary gifts in the first year alone. By the 3rd year, the number was 112, and the registry's protections had been tested 3 times by parties who discovered, each time, that a document written by Elara and signed without reading by a king who trusted the person who wrote it was not a document that yielded to pressure. The bruise never returned. She had asked the apothecary about it once, in the 2nd year, and he had said that in his professional opinion, the bruise had been the manufactured illness attempting to establish a secondary anchor in her body during the absorption, a designed countermeasure, and that its permanent absence suggested it had been fully and finally expelled, along with everything else. She accepted this explanation and did not think about it often. There was a child. She was 3 years old and had woken one morning, with her hands glowing softly in the dark, and had looked at them with her mother's calm, not frightened, not startled, simply present with what she was, in the way of someone who had been shown, from the very beginning, that what she carried was not a burden to be hidden, but a gift to be understood. They named her Marin. And on a morning in early autumn, in the sanctuary's original back room, the warm, quiet room with 2 low beds and a stove that Elara had built, first she sat at the window with her hands resting open on the sill and the light coming through them, soft and gold, nothing suppressed and nothing hidden. The compounds were not needed today. They were simply present, as they had always been present, as she had always been present, available, ready, and finally fully unafraid of being seen. Darian sat beside her with his shoulder against hers, and his daughter asleep in the next room, and said nothing, because nothing was exactly what the moment required. Outside, the capital moved through its morning. Below the sanctuary windows, the city that had once expelled her breathed in the medicine she had made from its rejection, and the world was, in this small and absolute way, changed. Her story reached you somehow, from somewhere. That means something. If this story moved you, if Elara's journey gave you something you needed today, please like this video. It takes 1 second and it means more than you know. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Every week there's a new heroine, a new gift, a new kingdom changed by someone the world tried to make invisible. And in the comments, I want to hear from you. Tell me what part of Elara's story stayed with you. Tell me which moment hit the hardest. Tell me about a time you kept giving when it cost you more than anyone knew. This channel exists because of those conversations, and I read every single one. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.